Welcome to Healing Horizons. Each week, we share the latest news and research in trauma informed care, positive and adverse childhood experiences, and psychological safety. I'm Allison Sebula.
And I'm Bree Twombly, and we are part of 10 Collective, where we are working to create a world where we genuinely care for one another. We want you to consider hiring us here at 10 to support you in implementing trauma-informed care and psychological safety-based programs and policies so you can better care for your employees, who in turn can better care for the communities and families that you serve. You can learn more about us on our LinkedIn page or go to 10-collective.com.
All right. So let's get into it. Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2024. And content advisory, we will be talking about trauma, which often involves violence. So, in trauma informed care news, here's a piece from NPR this week. How do you help young Afghan refugees heal? A new program in Maine offers a way. And again, you can always go to our website after we do this segment to find these articles and read more about them. We have links to everything that we are talking about today. So, Boston College and the local nonprofit Maine Immigrant and Refugee Services in the Lewiston, Auburn area launched an effort to support refugee parents and children in the United States as a way to prevent long term mental health and behavioral problems. Trying to work with the family a lot earlier with a prevention focus and a mental health promotion focus. Um, that's great. And I actually feel that this one ties in a lot to our event with Sharon Hirsch the other night with the other night we had, or the other day we had Sharon as the CEO and president of what used to be called Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, but now is called the Positive Childhood Alliance. And they just talk about how much they're focused on prevention and really things that support the whole family, and the whole community. Their approach employs people who share the same language, culture, and lived experience with newly arrived families. They receive training to provide evidence-based emotional, social, and practical support to parents and children. The organizers have used it successfully in resettled Somali, Bantu, and Bhutanese communities in Maine. Now they've adopted that solution, or they adapted it for recently resettled Afghan families in Maine and Michigan. So they want to think about addressing harsh interactions between parents and children and providing parents with the skills to navigate better, to regulate their own emotions, to not take those sort of violent actions toward their children. So they are teaching positive parenting skills as well as ways to better manage their own stress through mindfulness strategies. So practicing gratitude, looking for moments of joy, and various breathing techniques are some of the mindfulness tools that parents learn. Has to be a really stressful life event to immigrate here. Yeah. So especially if they're encountering like bonus racism, on top of everything. Yeah, really hard. So I'm glad these services exist, but I can understand why it would be really difficult to practice gratitude, during something so stressful. But hopefully what we've seen, right, when we look at these types of interventions, is that it's best when the immigrant groups are designing their own intervention and really saying, this is what we need, as opposed to being told what they need. So I hope that, that's happening here. So they found that families who participated report fewer family arguments and a reduction in symptoms of depression and traumatic stress in their kids. Oh, that's okay. Those are the kinds of results we like to see. Yep.
And I think this is right, it's showing stress of parents can have an impact on children,
Yes.
which we talk about a lot. We'll mention a few more times in the news today. But yeah, really supporting those parents, though those parents can be their best versions of themselves to provide that care for their children. So awesome to see.
Right. Okay, the next one is out of my hometown in California. New center to aid children who have been abused opens in San Luis Obispo. So, a new center for children who have been psychologically, physically, or sexually abused has opened. It's a collaborative effort under the district attorney's office with the Center for Family Strengthening. I know them well. The county's health agency and its child welfare services, the sheriff's office, and the suspected abuse response team, victim assistance center, and local law enforcement agencies. So families can come to one location and have forensic interviews, medical examiners, and childcare services all in one location, said Katie Robinson, um, child abuse interview team manager with the San Luis Obispo County District Attorney's Office. That's great. The building has multiple rooms, a playroom, family room, consultation room, office areas, family advocates, behavioral health specialists, medical staff, and a child abuse interview team. All of the services come to the child. In the past, children have gone from department. This is amazing. I'm going to start crying. Oh my God. Like, this is like what we always say. This has to happen. They're
Mhm.
doing it.
Yep. Yep. And we've talked about a few of these over the past few months. And one of the things that I like that this one specifically mentioned was childcare services. Because think about if you're a family going, there's a pretty high chance that you have more than one child.
Right.
And so to be able to have that child being taken care of while the family is discussing some of these scary, sensitive topics is important. So I like that they address that barrier as well.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, great.
So our next one for today is called New White Paper Examines the Impact of Mental Health, Toxic Stress, and Trauma in Education and Workforce Systems. And so this is a paper. It's from two different nonprofits called Corporation for a Skilled Workforce and Inside Track. They're providing recommendations for mitigating trauma and toxic stress for learners and workers. The paper shares recommendations for workforce and higher education leaders addressing the complex needs of individuals experiencing trauma and toxic stress as they are navigating things like education, workforce development, social services systems. Um, it talks about kind of the definitions and impacts of trauma and toxic stress. It highlights how those experiences can impact individuals and talks a lot about kind of data on the prevalence as well as effects of trauma, particularly within marginalized communities, and emphasizes the need for comprehensive trauma informed care in education and workforce development. One of the things that I liked that this paper was talking about is it does directly speak to toxic work environments. It talks about what they are, it gives some stats behind that. It also talks about moral injury. So if you aren't familiar in terms of their paper is that moral injury describes the profound psychological, social, and spiritual distress occurring from a violation of someone's core values. So things like fairness, justice, loyalty. So an example that they gave are things like limited budgets, demanding performance metrics, growing support needs of the individuals being served, often results in staff struggling to feel like they can give people they're working with the kind of support they truly need. And so this can lead for that to this worker developing like a sense of feeling like they're betraying the family and can result in moral injury that can have a huge impact on their ability to do the work, can lead to kind of burnout. So I really just liked that it used those terms, it called them out, it talked about how they're real. And these are all things that TEND can provide support for if it's providing education, if it's providing individual coaching to help. So processes and policies are also trauma informed when we're thinking about those to kind of limit these moral injuries, toxic workplaces, and burnout that can be experienced. So um, that was that paper that just came out. And we will link to that paper. You have to like enter information and download it. But it's free to download if you're interested in kind of reading the whole thing. Our next is Native Americans have experienced a dramatic decline in life expectancy during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the drop has been in the making for generations. And so this talked about how an overall drop in average living years from 71.8 years in 2019 to 65.2 by the end of 2021. That's dramatic. That's a huge drop. Um, so
That's
that was just during,
heartbreaking.
yeah, that was just during the time of COVID. But the authors went on to talk about that even before COVID, life expectancy for Indigenous men was already 5 years lower than for non-Hispanic white men in the United States. So there was already a pretty big disparity that was existing. So some of the
Mhm.
things that they said could possibly be contributing are Native Americans having the highest poverty rate among all minority groups, perhaps as high as 25%. Unemployment among American Indians and Alaska Natives in November 2022 was 6.2%, compared to 3.7% in the general population. And American Indian and Alaska Natives were also underserved in the US healthcare system. Adverse childhood experiences, social marginalization, and toxic, relentless stress also contribute to shorter lives, as we know from the research. And then they talked about the effects of unresolved historical trauma. So, again, historical trauma is
That's
kind of,
good because
yeah,
I feel like when it comes to speaking about, Native American people in the US and Canada, that it's really, uh uh, looking at things in the most shallow way to say that it's a result of adverse childhood experiences. And when settlers committed genocide against them and wiped out their culture, and then they weren't really able to assimilate into into European culture, and for various reasons. And then there were a lot of broken promises by the U.S. government in terms of what they were going to receive. And I think it's really, really, really hard to recover from this. And so, of course, they have so many aces, but it's like the depth of betrayal that they've experienced. Um, Here in the United States is it runs really deep. So this is just the clearest case of historical trauma. Yeah.
yeah, I was really glad that this article mentioned
Yeah.
historical trauma too, for the reasons that you were talking about. And I think we've also talked on here about kind of like white supremacy culture and very individualized and just the beliefs there, and how in contrast that is with many Native American, indigenous beliefs that are there.
Yeah,
And so just trying to function within this society that is the complete other end of the spectrum,
we
then
had that great event last spring with Dr. Darsha Narvaez about more kinship. They call it the kinship worldview, and a
mhm.
more interrelated way of trying to build a society through various indigenous beliefs. It was an amazing event. That video is on our YouTube channel, and I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do just also want to hold in mind just the cultural beliefs and practices and connections that were able to be maintained and are still actively practiced, even with all of those steps that colonizers took and continue to take to try to have Native Americans assimilate into white
Right.
culture. So,
Right.
and we know that those are also so incredibly important in terms of positive childhood experiences, in terms of healing. So, wanting to just name that and hold that in mind too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and I think with this one, they were talking about funding. There's been some additional funding, but there's still a huge funding gap when it talks about healthcare. And it was just making me think about how in the last few months we have shared some work being done in Canada and Australia, specific to kind of Indigenous populations, and thinking about barriers to healthcare, as well as designing healthcare centers, and how they really centered the Indigenous voices, their experiences, what they wanted, what the environment should look like, and just if there's anyone from the US government involved in any of this, maybe worth learning from them of how they did some of those processes and
I
made some
mean,
of those strides.
there are still places like on the Navajo reservation in Arizona and New Mexico that don't have running water. We've still never admitted in the U.S. that uranium mining has been a huge part of this declining life expectancy. Uranium mining on the and radiation poisoning on this reservation. So, I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, not only should we look at what they're doing in Australia, we've had some great recent examples, but wow, we have so much to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um it's embarrassing. Like it's embarrassing. Yeah. Um okay, next one. A national snapshot of training and technical assistant needs within the mental health workforce. So um Psychiatric Services, September 2024. And this report summarizes results from a national survey that aimed to assess the training and technical assistance needs of individuals who worked in mental health. A survey was distributed to mental health workers by 10 regional centers of a large nationwide federally funded training and technical assistance network during January to October of 2021. And a total of 2,321 individuals from 58 states and territories responded to the survey. Um, the three training and technical assistance needs they indicated most frequently were equitable and culturally responsive services, co occurring mental and substance use disorders, and mental health awareness and literacy. So, the survey findings reflect the continued need to address inequities in mental health services, particularly for communities of color. In addition, a cluster of topics mental health awareness and literacy, trauma informed care, crisis services, grief, and provider well being stemmed from the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on the nation's mental health. So, um, yeah, there's just so much here to dig into. I'm going to, want to read this report, but at 10 Collective, we we founded this organization to help with employee mental health. We saw that it was a crisis. We're continuing to just hear stories from so many employees across the United States that mental health is very low. The Surgeon General's report from last year, it's a real crisis. So we provide a lot of these trainings, these types of trainings, trauma informed care, crisis service, grief, provider well-being, mental health. We provide all of those here at 10 Collective, and we also do one-on-one coaching to really help cement the behavior change. So reach out to us if you would like to implement any of those. Okay, to support children, support the mental health and well-being of parents and caregivers. So yeah, this is what Sharon said the other night. That's like an exact quote.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know why that's not more obvious, but so the Surgeon General, he's been dropping like bombshell reports, and yeah,
Yes,
I
I
got
want more of them.
yeah, I know. I got to see and hear him speak in person at Boston University School of Public Health, where I went to school in last year, and
Mhm.
it was yeah, he was great. Um, and So the report is saying that the future of our children is closely tied to the support available to their parents and other caregivers. Recent commitments from U.S. Surgeon General Vivek highlight the urgent need for comprehensive support systems to address the intense stress faced by modern parents. Um, the report also noted nearly half of parents find their daily stress overwhelming compared to 26% of other adults. Unique stressors for parents, the report notes, include financial strain, time demands, and concerns about children's health and safety. Factors such as parental isolation, technology, and cultural pressures also contribute. Parental caregiver stress impacts their own mental well being and, by extension, their children's development. Many parents lack adequate support, leading to isolation and burnout. So, um, Yeah. I mean, we talk about this every week. There's just so much.
Yeah.
There's just
Yeah.
so much. We just don't support parents.
Yeah.
And yeah. So employers should offer flexible work policies such as remote work and adjustable hours to accommodate parenting demands. Advocating for more flexible childcare options can help working parents manage their responsibilities more effectively. Paid family leave is also critical in supporting parents during crucial times. So, yeah, I encourage you. The event from the other night will go up on YouTube shortly, and that'll go out in our newsletter. Um, but yeah, she did a really good job of talking about all the various policies that need to happen, and we're behind. I mean, we're so behind. Yeah, and our life expectancy is so much lower than any other developed country in the world. And yet we spend so much more on healthcare. So yeah, there's a lot there, but we're glad that this report came out by the U.S. Surgeon General, and I hope that some policies can change on a national level. I hope our um, representatives take note and that we have some new legislation because things cannot stay this way.
No, no. We need some big changes.
Yep.
We really do. Even just from a financial business standpoint in this country.
The only case that
That's all
anyone
that you
likes
care
to hear.
about. You still want to care about parents and children.
Yeah.
But, okay. Okay, moving into our kind of peer-reviewed and journal research for ACEs and PACEs. HPV self-collection for cervical cancer screening among survivors of sexual trauma, a qualitative study. So this study was trying to examine and assess the acceptability of high-risk HPV human papilloma virus. Is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I just
That's it.
realized that I did it, and I was like, let me see if I can
We're big on
remember this off of the top of my head. Okay.
gotta say
Um,
the acronym.
For high risk HPV self collection among individuals who have experienced intimate partner violence, the study had 16 participants living in Oregon. The study identified a few different key themes describing knowledge and attitudes towards cervical cancer screening for individuals who've experienced intimate partner violence. So they included things like guideline knowledge, prior office-based cervical cancer screening experience, barriers to cervical cancer screening, at-home self-collection experience, and testing confidence. So they found that individuals with a history of intimate partner violence have lower rates of cervical cancer screening adherence and higher rates of cervical dysplasia and cancer than other populations. Participants experienced fewer barriers and expressed increased comfort and control with the self-collection process. They wrote that the patient-centered approach of self-collection for cervical cancer screening can reduce barriers related to the pelvic exam and empower patients to reduce their risks of developing cervical cancer by enabling greater control of the testing process. And so with this one, just really thinking about what are those barriers that may exist and how can we reduce them? Is it actually necessary to go in and have a pretty invasive pelvic exam?
Right.
No. So what else can we do? And how can we kind of like support that? Because we do know that these screenings for cancer are really important. So catching possible cancer earlier is always better. So being able to support that to be able to happen by removing some of those barriers. So thank you for studies like that and being able to give some of that data and reasons why it's important. The next is called Future Considerations for Implementation and Impact of Community Narrative Initiatives. This was in the American Journal of Community Psychology, September of 2024. And this is actually a special issue that they put out. And within the special issue, there's a set of papers examining efforts to use narrative change to address ACEs. So they had a few recommendations based on reading through some of those articles and noticing some of the key themes. So things like including and amplifying voices of those with lived experience in policy. something we talk about all the time. We've already talked about it today, but incredibly, incredibly important. Narrative change themes related to resilience and strengths of communities, and then using research models of resilience to increase uptake of narrative change. And Allison, I thought, again, this connected really well to the event that we had this week. So in the event, we are talking a lot about the HOPE framework, and how they talk about how actually research indicates that the absence of positive childhood experiences may be more damaging to long-term health outcomes than the presence of ACEs. And these narrative shifts that they're talking about here seem to align really well with that. So instead of creating narratives that could enable kind of like shame or create this it's not me, it's them type of kind of narratives and attitudes, it's really thinking about how do we create narratives that are really talking about the positives, that are filled with the positives, and that highlight what is already going well, because there are things that are happening within communities that are already going well. So how do we highlight those and build upon those for
Um,
families?
but just to, for those of you watching who are familiar with the works by, the big trauma authors and researchers like Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Gabor Mate, Bruce Perry, they all say the same thing, which is that it's not the trauma itself, it's the absence of the parent's response to the trauma. So this research is really perfectly in line with what the
Mhm.
experts have been saying the entire time, which is that bad things happen to children, to humans every day. But we need these positive experiences with the adults in our lives as children to help us build that resilience to stress, because I don't, that's just how life is. Like, these stressful things really happen. And so without that nurturance, this really stressful for kids.
Yep.
So yeah, this is just follows that perfectly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Adverse childhood experiences and coping strategies. Do they make a difference in psychopathic traits and altruism for young adults? This is in Current Psychology, September 2024. The study explored the impact of ACEs on psychopathic and altruistic traits, considering participants' coping strategies. A total of 420 young Spanish adults, 18 to 20 years old, um, and total ACEs and avoidant emotion focused coping were associated with higher psychopathic traits. Um, Total ACEs and problem focused coping were linked to altruism. Okay. It is crucial to promote secure environments in childhood that facilitate the development of adaptive coping strategies. These strategies can mitigate the long term effects of ACEs, reducing the likelihood of developing psychopathic traits while simultaneously increasing altruism. So, avoidant emotion focused coping versus problem focused coping. I'd be curious to dig in and see exactly what those are. Yeah. Um, but I think every person in the world is obsessed with what creates a psychopath. That's why Mindhunter is like the most popular Netflix show ever
Mhm.
made. So this is the type of thing that um I'm sure a lot of you are interested. How does someone become either psychopathic or altruistic? Um Okay, next one, neurocognition and academic achievement among bereaved children in the Generation R cohort. So, this is in Scientific Reports, September 2024. Childhood bereavement is an adverse event, yet children demonstrate considerable variability in health outcomes. Using data from the population based Generation R study, wherein nearly 10,000 pregnant mothers were recruited between 2002 and 2006, bereavement by 10 years of age was experienced by 796 of those in the population. So there were no differences in academic achievement or other subtests of neurocognitive function between bereaved and non bereaved children. Secondary analyses adjusting for pre bereavement nonverbal cognitive ability and mental health problems revealed an overall association between bereavement and subsequent full scale IQ and matrix reasoning, but only among those youth whose caregivers reported that the loss had an emotional influence on the child. So, commentary, while the ACEs score wasn't meant for individuals. Um, um, there's certainly an association between ACEs and a lot of different um, outcomes. So, yeah, neurocognition and academic achievement. So, I mean, what do you think, Bree? So, this is kind of saying isn't it kind of saying like it doesn't really have an effect?
Yeah, so it seemed like they found that it didn't really have an effect. The only time that it seemed like there was a little bit of an effect was when there was a large emotional like impact on the child. And
But my question would be like, but why was there a large emotional? Yeah,
yeah,
like I it
yeah.
kind of leads me to more questions. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that, like, for me is, like, going back to, like, you can have an ACE score, or you could say, like, I experienced bereavement as a child, but then I think there's often that jump to, like, okay, like, now here's what's going to happen or, like, could
Mhm,
happen,
mhm,
which is the importance to remember that it's a dose response relationship, in the original ACEs study, um, but that there are lots of other factors that exist. So, thinking about cultural factors, thinking about the way that maybe the person that experienced the loss died,
yeah,
how was it talked about, how was the child responded to? Like, there's so many of those factors,
mhm,
that I think go into if it's going to be an experience that's going to be highly stressful and could lead to toxic stress, or if it's maybe even a highly stressful event that has a lot of nurturing and protective factors around it that doesn't end up in toxic stress. So I think it's hard when studies are looking at like one part of it, like the possible like negative impact that it had, and not considering that there's so many other things going on that could have an impact
yeah,
over the long term.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, our last one for the studies today is actually one that just came out that I normally do this like Tuesday, Wednesday, but I added this one this morning because this was a really important one and I didn't want to go through this week without talking about it. And Allison, I know that you shared this study on LinkedIn. So after I go through, if you have anything that you want to add,
Okay.
please jump in. So this is the effects of childhood adversity on 25 disease biomarkers in 20 health conditions in adulthood, differences by sex and stressor type. Um,
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was mine or Bree's that was frozen. So it looks like it was Bree that was frozen. So I will go through this one. Um, so let's see. Yeah, so this was in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity, January 2025. Um, Researchers examined how a variety of different early life stressors affect disease biology and health. They also investigated the extent to which these associations differed for males versus females. Um, and they obtained data from um, 2,111 participants in the
Sorry,
US.
my power went out.
Oh,
So I apologize for quickly dropping off. Thanks for picking up, Allison. I'll let you keep going so I don't interrupt.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you froze, like, or if I, yeah.
No, it's the second time today that the power has just randomly shut off. So I switched to my
Awesome.
hotspot. So if it happens again, I shouldn't be impacted.
Okay, okay, got it. Dang. Okay, participants reported on the types and severity of adverse childhood experiences, and including financial distress, abuse, neglect, how often they moved, whether they lived away from their biological parents, and whether they had been on welfare. Additionally, participants provided biological samples for calculating 25 disease biomarkers and indicated whether they had ever been diagnosed with any of 20 major health conditions. So, just for you all tuning in, biomarkers make the strongest studies, especially when we're studying things like health or mental health can be really hard to quantify, especially like if you're asking someone's opinion, like how often did you feel depressed? It's really actually kind of hard to, if you see a study like that and it comes from a self-report, it's just often not quite as valid because oftentimes people's reports don't exactly match their experience. And so having biomarkers, meaning like, oh, we're actually measuring cortisol, for example, is one. Then it's just more um, um, it's just a stronger study. So, did you want to stay on, or did you mean to go off?
No, something happened again. I thought I was connected to my hotspot, but it had changed me to connect back to my home internet,
Awesome,
and that did
awesome. Yeah.
something. So
Okay.
just technology funness. So
Great.
sorry. I'm being so disruptive. If it disconnects again, I will stay off just so I stop
Okay.
interrupting.
Okay. Okay. I wasn't. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure. So, the researchers, let's see. Da 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 da. Um, led by UCLA Health, found that a person's sex and their unique experiences of childhood trauma can have specific consequences for their biological health and risk of developing 20 major diseases later in life. The result was 2 stressor classes for males, high stress and low stress, and 3 for females, high stress, moderate stress, and low stress. Overall, those in the low stress classes exhibited the fewest major health issues, with participants' risk increasing as their stressor exposure increased. Both males and females in the high stress classes had the poorest metabolic health and the greatest inflammation. However, there were differences between the sexes. The impacts of adverse childhood experiences on metabolic health biomarkers were greater for females than for males. Emotional abuse and neglect also tended to have greater effect in males than females for several biomarkers and health conditions such as blood disorders, mental and behavioral health issues, and thyroid issues. So, stress is implicated in 9 of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States today. And it's about time we talked about that statistic seriously and to begin to screen for stress in all pediatric and adult clinics nationwide. Screening for stress to me makes more sense than screening for ACEs. What do you think?
Yeah, I think with ACEs, we're looking at a list that someone developed when there's been so many studies with all different types of stressors.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of bias in that I've selected these 12 to be screened on and eliminated other ones.
yeah,
And so really talking about that, I think could have a different kind of impact.
yeah, yep. Um, and then relating disease back to stress. I mean, you don't see that often, actually. So this is like, yeah, this seems like we're
And
really
that's what
making
it
a big
is.
shift. Yeah,
Yeah, it's your stress response system that's overly activated. So, yeah.
we're getting there. Okay. The present data are informative in this regard as they can help providers identify what adjunctive stress management interventions um, may be indicated based on each patient's biological sex and specific childhood adversity profile. This approach would move the field away from a one size fits all approach to treating stress related health conditions and toward a precision medicine based approach that could greatly improve patients' lives by providing them with the exact therapeutics they need most. All right. You want to get the last one?
Yeah. So the last one is under psychological safety. And so I learned a new term reading this article from Forbes called productivity. So I'll talk about what that is. So productivity, your boss might fake it more than you, new survey finds. So this was a study done from WorkHuman, and they uncovered what they called productivity or fake productivity. So, highlighting how misaligned perceptions and top down pressure are creating a toxic culture of performative work. Not good. So, according to their findings, the majority of employees, 67%, deny faking activity, but almost half of managers, at 48%, say it's a common issue on their team. So, that's not, there's misalignment there. Um, And then, according to the report, productivity is happening among managers and the C suite executives at higher rates. And I think that's interesting because when we see a lot of things, it's we need to monitor frontline workers, not the people that are in leadership positions for every little thing. So there's this
Mhm,
mistrust and need to monitor.
mhm.
But then it sounds like at the higher levels, it's happening even more. Um, so the majority of managers blame either distractions or burnout, low well-being for faking. 40% cite personal responsibilities, while 33% say it's laziness. Don't really like that 33%. Let's dig beneath the behavior and not label it
Yeah.
as laziness. The managers who admit faking productivity say it was a desire for work-life balance to appease management or burnout. So if those things are going on for you at that level, they're probably also going on for other people. Um, they also spoke about productivity anxiety, or the feeling that employees have that they must be always on and that there's always more that they should be doing. The research found it is really pervasive in the US workplaces. And over 50% of respondents, these stats were alarming to me. Over 50% of respondents report they're expected to immediately respond to all Slacks, messages, or emails. And 52% say they're expected to be flexible with their working hours to accommodate after hours meetings. And so I think if we take those and then we look at the recent Surgeon General report around having like flexibility, how can you be in a 7 p.m. meeting if you're a single parent trying to get your kids dinner and down for bed?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
So, yeah.
The
Um,
only jobs I've ever had though, like this, where productivity was required because you had to be so responsive and there were no boundaries, the leaders were actual like had like disordered levels of narcissism or psychopathy. Otherwise, when you have someone that doesn't, or your organization doesn't have, hasn't adopted this, like you talk about organized around trauma, if you have just like a boss who's like well adjusted, well tuned, high emotional intelligence, like they don't make people do that.
no.
No, it's every time I've been in a toxic work situation, the person in charge has like a serious like control issues, basically.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I think when you get to the level of saying, I want to monitor like mouse movements and mouse clicks of people, I think the real thing is to step back and do some self reflection on like why you're feeling that
Mhm.
need, or why the organization is feeling that need. I think those are the important questions. And then those are the things to kind of think about and act on, not implementing mouse clicks tracking for people. So they talked about how creating a culture of psychological safety can help to offset this productivity anxiety and this concept of productivity, right? If we're actually engaging in conversations, if we're having empathetic responses, caring about people, all important things to reduce that. They shared how low productivity and productivity are symptoms of a poor culture. So, creating a toxic cycle of performative productivity and performance anxiety. It further suggests that the solution resides in addressing systemic cultural issues rather than scrutinizing individual workers.
Mhm.
So, again, those questions of what's happening within this organization that is leading to this kind of behavior or this desire for this change. I just thought that this article really spoke to one of the reasons why we wanted to start Tend. It's because a lot of these problems are existing because organizations aren't caring for the people that
Yep.
work at the organizations. And Allison, I think you already spoke to some of the reasons why that may be happening. Um, but yeah, workplaces where people genuinely care about one another, where there is a culture of psychological safety, where trauma informed principles are being practiced throughout every part of the organization. Incredibly important.
Incredibly important. Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to Healing Horizons this week. We will see you next week. We do have an event coming up next Wednesday with our advisor, 10 Collective advisor, Danielle Prince. And that's on supporting family healers. So people who work with families and children, how to support the staff. And so that's one of our main missions here at 10 Collective. And Danielle is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to supporting people who work in these positions. So this is going to be a great event, and I hope you will join us. We will see you for that on Wednesday, and we'll see you back here on Thursday.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.